This is the finale of our exhibit tour series on Arthur Barnes and the Margaret M. So far we've discussed the fascinating Arthur G. Barnes, a man who lost his eyesight and his right arm in a childhood accident, but endeavored to fulfill his dreams despite his disabilities. We discussed the culmination of these dreams, the ambitious Margaret M., a masterclass by any measure, with form and function, competence and elegance. Then we chatted about Arthur's process of building the Margaret M., the highly technical procedures of a man at work in his element. And now, I'd like to finish off by following the Margaret M through the years after Arthur built her, up until the present day where she sits happily in the Maritime Heritage Center. Arthur built the Margaret M between the years of 1951 and 1952, and that same year he finished, he sold her, 1952. I imagine Arthur would have desired to hold on to her, to hold on to such a labor of love, but Arthur found the effort of sailing and maintenance sadly frustrating. But then again, as we've seen in the previous episodes, the Margaret M was built for the sea. She was no trophy, she was a proper vessel. And while this is purely my own speculation, I imagine if I were in his shoes, I'd want her to sail too, to ride the waves, as she was so meticulously crafted with the intention to do so. Whatever the case may have been, the reality is he did sell the Margaret M, and she passed into other hands. She had 8 owners and many more sailors during her lifetime, and 9th now is the Maritime Heritage Center. And who knows if she'll stay here indefinitely, but she's here now, so we'll appreciate her while we can, just like Arthur. In a 2006 issue of Pacific Yachting magazine, one that I've mentioned numerous times at this point during this series, as it seems to be the most extensive account there is of the Margaret M and Arthur G. Barnes, and thus it comprised a great deal of my research for this series. Philip Teese, previous owner of the Margaret M, recounts a touching moment between Arthur and the Margaret M from a period after he'd sold her, after Philip's father had bought the Margaret M from a second-hand market, and he'd spent some time sailing the vessel. He'd wanted to meet the creator of this great boat. Philip Teese, a previous owner of the Margaret M, recounts a touching moment between Arthur and the Margaret M during a time after he'd sold her. After Philip's father had acquired the Margaret M from a second-hand market and Philip had spent some time sailing her, he'd wanted to meet the man who created this great boat. In the end, Arthur invited Philip to return a few days later to watch him work. But first, Philip brought Arthur to his house where the Margaret M, which Arthur had lost track of in the 8 years since he parted with her, was aloft in a cradle for some minor spring refits. In the article, Philip writes this, quote, "As he ran his hands over her freshly varnished decks and the complexity of her underwater curves, Barnes fell very silent. He explored the planking of her hull, still glass smooth and seamlessly tight. The reunion was an emotional moment. Finally, in a quiet voice he said to me, 'Please, promise me one thing, that you'll sail her carefully. Don't put her onto the bloody rocks.'" End quote. It's a pretty reasonable request if you ask me. It's really too bad Arthur didn't get to spend more time with the Margaret M. He had to let her go so soon after her creation. But the challenging construction had been overcome, and I think it's a fair decision he made, all things considered. And now the Margaret M finds herself at home in the Maritime Heritage Center. She's been here 17 years now, and will continue to share her story with guests as long as she's with us. And I'm sure her memory will remain in the minds of folks who had the pleasure of witnessing her long after she's moved on. I know it will for me. Well then, that concludes our exhibit tour series of the Margaret M and Arthur G. Barnes. I hope you enjoyed this series just as much as I have. And as always, come visit us in person and see the Margaret M and all of our other exhibits for yourself. You can find us in Campbell River at 621 Island Highway, near the Discovery Pier. And once again, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time.